Hello, this is Bob Barney again with Tamco Paint, and we're going to go over the technology for base coat, clear coat. Pardon the glasses, but when I have to read some things, I need glasses. I'm sorry, but I'll take them off from time to time. Base coat technology is about 65 years old in Europe, and base coat technology in America is about 40 years old. Before the Americans understood what the Europeans were doing, base coats were a problem in America. When I first got into the business in 1980, in January 1980 in Florida, we were selling DuPont at the time, and they did not know how to make a base coat clear coat. And what they did is they made a product called Lucite, which was a lacquer. It was an acrylic lacquer, and they already had all the car colors in that, and so they would have the customer apply the lacquer, which is very easy to do, and then they would clear coat it with a urethane. Well, the minute there was a little stone chip, the clear would peel right off. It was called Color International, and it was a big disaster for DuPont when we were selling it at the time, and we couldn't figure out how the Germans were doing it. So everybody was starting to bring in some of the German technology. And then, of course, Sikkens came in. They're Dutch, but had the same type of technology that Glazeret and Spieshecker had. And we couldn't figure out why they were able to make a base coat clear coat that basically didn't peel. So let me tell you about the technology. The base coat that we use today is, and have used now for 40 years, the same base coat technology the Germans were working on in the 1970s, or even earlier, I guess, was you have to turn a paint, be it an enamel paint or a urethane paint like we do at Tamco, you have to turn it into a lacquer. The problem with acrylic lacquer is acrylic lacquer has no solvent resistancy whatsoever. If you take an acrylic lacquer paint, it never cures. It dries, it air dries, but if you take a rag full of lacquer thinner, you can resolvent it and wipe it right off instantly. And that's the problem with lacquer. So when you put a urethane clear over the lacquer, it dries slower, it reflows the lacquer into a liquid, the lacquer flash dries, the acrylic lacquer that is, and the clear cures separately, and so it's really just laying on top of the now dried lacquer, and it's no adhesion whatsoever. It will just peel off. So what the Germans understood was which we talked about in the resin show that I did, the Germans realized that the three types of lacquer, the most solvent resistant lacquer there is a furniture lacquer called CAB. And CAB lacquer, when you put a urethane clear coat over top of it, depending on the type of CAB you're using, it does not dry separately than the urethane clear coat, and it has adhesion. The clear will actually bite into it and have adhesion to it, and it will not peel. Now, in the CAB world, there are different types of CAB lacquer. And by the way, all CAB it's made from trees. And the only company in the world that I'm familiar with, and even the companies in Japan, China, Russia, Europe, they all use Eastman. That's where you get your CAB. And there's many grades of CAB. So the CAB, I'm sorry, I'm just reading my notes here. So when you're making a base coat today, you can use one of two or three resins that we talked about in the resin show. The first resin that the Europeans use mainly, not all the Europeans, but like Glazeret used, was an enamel, just an alkyd enamel that they would mix 50-50, resin to resin, it's always 50-50 basically, with a CAB that's made for enamel. There's a CAB, there's probably 100 CABs out there, but there's mainly 5 or 6 that are used in automotive. And each CAB that Eastman makes is for a particular type of resin. So if you're using an enamel resin, you use one type of CAB. If you're using an acrylic urethane resin like we do, then you have to have another type of CAB. And if you use a specific acrylic resin like we do, you have to use a specific CAB. Trade secret, ain't going to go on what resin we're using in it and what CAB we're using. But the one we're using has the most solvent resistancy of any of the CABs, and it is the least likely to ever peel. And I'll get into that technology of how base coat, clear coat works and what why the clear is so important. It's not what you think. It's not just for protection for the UV and to make it gloss. There is in the high end base coats, there's a reason for it. So anyway, what's in a gallon of toner? When you see back here, you can see our toner machine. What is in a gallon of toner? Or in that case, a quart. Well, I'm going to show you this little handmade drawing that I did real quick. I'm probably going to be backwards, I think. But anyway, about 15 to 20% of a gallon of toner is the resin that you're using at 100% solids. And the pigment is anywhere, and that's when you get pigment and you cut it in resin, and the higher the concentration of pigment, the better coverage you get. And we do a high concentration of pigment. Anybody uses our product and realizes, at least from us, we've had some problems with some other people, but with us, we have very good coverage. And it's the pigment load can be anywhere from 15 to 50% of the formula. And the CAB that you put in it matches how much resin you had put in the first place, 1-to-1. And then after that, you either have special additives. This is basically the secret of most paints. It's not the resin you're using necessarily, or the CAB you're using, or the solvents you're using, because that the SDS tells your competition what you're doing. But what you don't use in an SDS, because they're not reportable, because they're in small quantities, but they make a big difference, is the additives, special flop controls that you put in, special metallic controls that you put in, special anti-fisheye agents that you put in. And there's some other products that you put in your base coats that actually make them orient right, that makes them lay down in a certain way, cover in a certain way, and even adds coverage to the pigment load. And then, of course, the very end, anywhere from 25 to 35% of a gallon of toner. Here comes a train. We're on the main line of Norfolk Southern tracks that go from Norfolk to Cincinnati, Ohio. But the solvent blends of fast, medium, or slow. It's like a stairway. You start with a fast, you go with a medium, you go with a slower, but never very slow in a base coat. And it's anywhere from 25 to 35% of the formula. That is the makeup of a base coat, clear coat that you use today, or anybody uses around the world. So some companies make you use a base coat, a specialized base coat reducer. And I want to explain why that is. Because when you're making the toner, remember I told you about all these additives that you need in the paint? Well, we put those additives in our toner line. We do not put those additives in our reducer line, which makes sure you have a special reducer just for the base coat that you cannot use in your clear coats and you cannot use in your urethane 2K systems. And that is the, here comes another one. And that is a major advantage when you use like Tamco versus a lot of these that make you have a special base coat reducer, because they're adding the additives in the reducer to make you buy their reducer. That's the case. We do have additives in our reducers as well, but we'll get into that when we do a reducer show. So when you do your base coat, and the total toner is probably around 65 to 70% solids, because you're going to mix, like with ours, you're going to mix ours 1-to-1 with our reducer. And so that brings down the sprayable solids to maybe anywhere from 30 to 35% solids, depending on how much the A side had solids in it, because each type of colorant, be it metallic or a pearl or a white, for example, or a black, has different levels of resin and solvents in them. They are the proprietary things that make paint cover or don't cover. And one of the ways that you sell more paint is make it not cover, and you overbind it. So even though the binder is in the formula of our base coat technology, We also, when you mix our product, add just a little bit more binder to it as an overkill, and there's a reason for that. In ours, it's a very small percentage, so we still have our coverage, but it actually aids in helping an intercoat adhesion. So I'm going to explain what the technology is in a good, very good base coat product. A very good base coat clear coat product is just more than just a base coat with a clear on top of it that gives you UV and shine. Because we are using what's called a functional resin. A functional resin just simply means that it accepts catalyst. It accepts high isocyanate catalyst. So when you put our base coat down, you're not catalyzing it. We recommend you always catalyze base coat because it's a foolproof way to make sure you have intercoat adhesion that will never fail. But, and this is why we tell people when you buy our base coat to buy our clear coat. Because what we do to make up for the fact most people are not catalyzing their base coat is that we are over catalyzing our clear coats by up to 25 and 35%. Why do we do that? There's two reasons. One is in moist conditions, as I explained in the resin episode, isocyanate hardener would rather mate with water than with your resin. So in high humidity conditions, 10 to 15% of your catalyst can be robbed into the air and not into your paint. So we always over catalyze no matter what in our single stage and in our base coat, clear coats. So if the moisture robs some of the catalyst, it still is going to have at least a 1-to-1 because you need a 1-to-1 cross-linking ratio. The atoms and the molecules on the A side have to be exactly connected, and to make that screen, like I explained in the resin program, to make that really cross-linked where you don't have failure, you don't have loss of gloss, you don't have dieback, and you don't have problems with chemicals affecting it, acid rain, things like that. And so when we do the over-catalyze the clear coat, there's a second reason we over-catalyze it by so much, is because when you put the clear on top of the base, that's why you have a window on our base of 8 hours. After 8 hours, you got to sand it and you got to respray it again, because our base coat is a very high-tech base coat. It's not one of these cheap generic type things you think you see out there. We are an acrylic urethane, high-technology base coat that requires catalyst. If you're not going to add the catalyst, it's going to pull the catalyst out of the clear coat and mate with it. And then when it does that, it also gives you an intercoat adhesion between the clear and the base coat to stop peeling. And so now you see if you have maybe 10% loss to humidity and you have another 15% loss or more to catalyzing the base coat, that's why you have to be way over catalyzed to still have that 1-to-1 catalyzation in the clear coat. When I was working, I won't get into that, but give you an example here. When you put a generic clear or a clear that is following just the recommended HEW, that's how much catalyst you need for the solids of your A side. When you follow the recommended catalyzation ratio of isocyanate to clear coat, or to 2K or of any kind, it's a 1 to 105. They only give you a 5% overflow for moisture. And so when you are using like a generic clear, like most generic clears out there are using that 105 to 1 ratio from catalyst to the resin. And so when you're going to put that clear over top of our base coat, and I can tell you it's going to be the same with PPGs, I'll just say that, it's going to rob 15% of the catalyst out of the clear to catalyze properly. And so what's going to happen to the clear when it's only at 85% catalyzed? Well, you're going to get a dieback. And sometimes you don't see it for 2 to 3 weeks in the cure cycle of that clear coat. But it's not clear. It's not, it's not, what's the right word? It's not catalyzed 100%. Now, people will tell me right now, well, I use such and such base coat, clear coat, and I know that clear don't dye back even if it has moisture and if it intercoats. Well, most of your low-end base coat, clear coats, first of all, the base coat's enamel, and it does not take a hardener. And so the clear is not integrating with the base coat. And so the clear coat can be 105 to 1 and not be a problem. The second thing is most of the generic base coats out there, or even the low-end base coats from the big paint companies, most of those are enamel clears. They're acrylic enamel clears with a urethane cross-linker. That's all they are. We explained that in the resin show. And so they're never going to die. You don't have to catalyze it, and it's not going to die because that's the nature of an enamel. And painters love to use enamel clears. They don't know they're enamel clears. They think they're polyurethane clears, but they're enamel clears. And they're alkyd enamel clears, and they're not going to last very long. But they are easy to spray. They gloss up. They look great for the first 30 days especially. But what most people know that really have experience with these enamelized polyurethane clears is they constantly lose gloss in the first 6 months. 30, 40 days later, there is such a wet look loss of gloss that is so noticeable that if somebody looks at a job they did 45 days ago, they can see a major loss of gloss. The reason for that is that's the nature of an enamel. An enamel clear coat takes anywhere from 60 to 90 days to cure. And that's, as you see, as it's curing, it's losing gloss. And that is why you can see sand scratches come through those cheaper clear coats in longer than 30 days. And that's why they also tell you why not to wax a car for 120 days in most of these clears. If you use a true acrylic urethane clear, that's 100% acrylic urethane, not some kind of a blend, then you really, in 30 days, that most of the acrylic urethane clear coats out there that are true acrylics will cure in the 30-day time frame, so you can wax a car after 30 days. Most of our clears, of our faster clears, like our HC 9500, it's 95% cured in 1 hour at 80 degrees. It's 100% cured the next day. You literally, and I don't recommend this just because of cold conditions and stuff like that, but in less than 3 to 4 days, you could wax a 9500 paint job, and it's not going to harm that product at all. Our 4100 is slower, our 2104 is slower, and even our high impact is slower, but not like the 9500. So I wanted to get into the technology of what a base coat clear coat is, how it is very, in your high-end Premier Series type base coats, how technical they really are to have intercoat adhesion to your primers, and a long-lasting, non-peeling paint job that will last anywhere from 8 to 10, 12 years. And if it's always best, like I said, to catalyze the base coat. One of the things with our product, we have a 1K sealer called Forever Seal, which is made to always have a urethane put over top of it, a catalyzed urethane to go over top of it, to have adhesion to it. And that is why whenever you use our base coat over Forever Seal, you have to catalyze our base coat. Not the Forever Seal. Don't catalyze, that ain't gonna help you. But if you catalyze the base coat, what you have to do, and then you go over the Forever Seal, you will have no peeling off the Forever Seal as well. When you're talking about our epoxy sealer, the DTA, you never need to catalyze the base coat. It will, because the epoxy cures up in a different manner than the Forever Seal does. And so you're fine what it is. So the whole idea of the Tamco base coat, it is not the average lower end clear. The reason that we have such good pricing compared to the big guys, I will pull our products against any of the 5 major brands for quality and for technology. I worked for PPG 35 years ago when they bought out American Lacquers in Tampa, Florida. And I worked with some of their chemists, and I know some of their people ended up working for Tamco later on. But I know their technology, and they have very superior technology. PPG is probably one of the most highly technical paint companies in the market. That's why they're number one. But they also are number one when it comes to pricing. They really price their products. We're going to have a show on pricing in general of making automotive paint and what you should be aware of. People ask, well, why are you, basically 50% cheaper than a gallon of the big guy? Well, because we do not have a distributor in the middle. The one thing that we decided to do in 2009 was to start selling directly to customers and doing away with distribution, because most distribution doubles their money from what it costs them. So if a paint company is selling a clear for, let's say, $500 for the clear, the distributor, which is called a jobber in our business, is paying about $250. And so there's a lot of inflation right there for somebody to take a gallon off the shelf, put it in their truck, and deliver it to you. We take it off our shelf, put it in a UPS or a FedEx truck, and deliver it to you at about half the price. So do not be thinking that our clear coats and our base coats are inferior because the price seems that they are. We don't have the middleman to take up a lot of that profit. We have a very high-end technical product. And this is why we want you to stick within our system, because you use other products, and we're going to talk about this especially when we get to the clear coats and the urethanes. You will not get the results that you will get when you use our products inside the TAMCO family of what you do when you mix products. You have to use our products, and there's a reason for it. It's technical products. I have spent many years making these products where they work perfectly with each other. And so that is the show on what is base coat, why it became what it is today, and it's basically controls the whole world when it comes to most cars today. Not the industrial world, not the OEM world, not the aircraft or the marine world, but the automotive world is base coat technology. So this is Bob Barney for TAMCOpaint.com. And these training videos are really for our own employees so they understand what's going on when they talk to people. But I thought it was good to let our customers also see what we have and why we do what we do. Thank you again for watching.